There's three ways that you're going to be successful in this class. Okay, the first way is going to be this by knowing your AP World History themes. This is something that you should already be familiar with, but if not, that's okay. We're really going to review this in the first semester, and by the first semester end of it, you should know it, and we'll be moving on talking about more things, more complex things. Okay, but you've really got to know these because if I ask questions about these, let's say I ask a writing prompt about culture and you write all about, um, economic systems, then you're not going to be able to score a single point at all whatsoever. Okay. Um, so let's look at the first category. Okay. We're looking at interactions between humans and the environment. Okay. That is like the main heading. And then it breaks down into subheadings. Okay. So this is going to be anything with man and the environment, how he changes the environment, how the environment affects him. Okay. The first one is demography and disease. Okay, you might not have heard of demography, but I'm sure you've heard of demographics. Okay, demographics are characteristics of a population. Okay, characteristics that are normally quantitative data. Okay, so data that can be represented in numbers. So this is normally percentages, right? 20% of this population is male. 30% of this population is above the age of 55. 10% of this population follows Catholicism. 20% of Mr. Bennett's first period is coming from Baldwin Middle School. Okay, these are all demographics, right? It's anything that you can use to describe a population, right? So this first heading is disease. Okay, so disease, COVID-19, flu, smallpox, bubonic plague, disease kills people. So really what we're looking at in this first one is how does disease change the demographics of a population, right? Maybe dark and demented, but that's really easy. Some diseases kill certain groups more quicker. So how is that actually going to change the characteristics of the population? That's kind of the first thing that we're going to look at in this theme. Okay. The next one is migration. Okay. Migration is the movement of people. Okay. In AP, this is the movement of people from one region to another. Okay. So there's voluntary migration. So think turn of the century, a whole bunch of people are coming to America because they want jobs. That is an example of a migratory pattern that we'll be talking about in this class. There's also forced migration. The transatlantic slave trade is going to be another migration pattern that we will be looking at in this class. Forced migration because they were brought to the New World against their will. Okay. The next one is patterns of settlement. Okay. Where do people live and why do they live there, right? Y'all took first half of world history. Y'all read about all these ancient civilizations. The majority of them were by rivers, okay? And they were by rivers because they needed access to some sort of water source, okay? That would be a pattern of settlement. Where compared to today, the majority of people live in cities. That's another pattern of settlement. We're no longer tied to a river or a lake for a water source because we now have running water. Okay, so that's a pattern of settlement. Where do people live and how do they live there? Okay. The last one is adaptation to environment / climate, right? How does man adapt to that environment and make it livable? Okay. Probably the best example I can think of right now is terrace farming, right? The Incas, they live up in these mountains, okay? They have a lack of arable farmland, okay? Well, how do they allow their population to grow? They do terrace farming, which basically means they cut flat plains into the side of these mountains and turn it into farmland. Think the Aztecs, right? They live on a lake, modern day Mexico City. Well, if their population is to grow, they need more arable farmland. So what do? They make floating gardens, right? So adaptation to the environment, climate is really what do these civilizations do that allows the area they live in to be livable, right? So that's the first one. Okay. The next one is the development and interactions of cultures. Okay. It's as easy as this. AP asks about culture, think religion. Because if you talk about religion, when they're asking about culture, you're guaranteed to get some points. Okay. And you see here, that's the very first thing they talk about religion. Okay. So religion, we're going to be talking a whole bunch this year: Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, Islam. We'll talk about Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism. Okay, Culture is kind of this broad term. I always think it's so much easier to be able to identify than to actually give a definition. Okay, if we look up the definition online. Okay, one definition here is refers to the shared beliefs, values, behaviors, and material objects that characterize a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, customs, and social habits. Right. So if we're looking at the culture of Catholicism, there's physical representations of that. Right. You have the cross, you have the rosary, you have beliefs like the Eucharist, that when you take communion, you are actually receiving the body and blood of Christ. You have beliefs like the concept of confession in order to receive God's salvation, right? All of that falls under the cultural category. How does their churches look? Are they depicting Jesus in stained glass windows? Are they choosing not to depict their holy figures like in Islam? If some sects of Islam do not believe that you should have a physical painting or representation of Muhammad, okay, those are all cultural aspects. Just like your generation, Lamp High School has a culture to itself, right? The music y'all listen to, the slang you use, how you dress, how you hang out, what are y'all into, what type of video games y'all are playing. Those are all aspects of culture. It's very open ended, um, and it's really broad based, right? So it's a lot that if I ask about this, that you're going to be able to explore and talk about, right? Belief systems are very similar to religion. The only difference is there is no quote unquote God or deity. So it's a set of beliefs and practices that you want to follow. Confucianism starts really out this way before it morphs into more of a religion. At first, they really don't believe, well, they never really believe Confucian to be a god, but they have all these morals and standards they have to live by. That's a good example of belief system. Philosophies, right? We brought up in class the other day. I asked y'all what ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, these all these kind of thought processes and beliefs. Any sort of higher order thinking and thought processes that will be represented in society falls under culture, and then ideology will also, right? Ideology, we'll definitely be looking at those later. That's going to be like fascism, communism. That's kind of also a set belief system that have certain things that you have to believe and certain practices. Okay. The next one that falls under category is science and learning, right? What type of scientific beliefs do they have? What type of scientific developments are they making? Okay. Learning, what is their schooling like? Do they offer schools? Is that only for the rich? What type of courses are being offered, right? Are they, are they taking world history? Are they taking U.S. history? Or are they being only sent to, instructional schools to be learning a trade, right? You see here, we've kind of linked technology with this. Okay, even though technology and innovation is its own category, there is kind of a linkage here with culture. The best example of that would be the Gutenberg printing press, right? The Gutenberg printing press is definitely a technology, but it does have a cultural aspect to it. So if you're talking about culture for the Gutenberg printing press, you're not really going to focus more so on the printing press and how it works, but you're going to talk about, hey, look, culturally, this completely changes Europe because now books are more affordable and they're being mass produced, so they're cheaper. And since that's the case, we're going to have a rise in literacy levels and a rise in the thoughts. People are going to be able to read pamphlets and talk about them. And because of that, Europe is going to become really intertwined. And thought processes aren't going to remain as isolated, right? If you look at the Protestant Reformation, one of the reasons why that spreads like wildfire is because of the printing press. And even though a lot of Europe is still literate during that time period, they're making political cartoons that you can just look at and understand. They're having songs and chants where even if you can't read, you're learning those. And even if you are illiterate, you're listening to people who have read and understand this. Okay, so there's definitely a cultural aspect to technology. But if you want to talk about it, a lot of this class is not necessarily what you say, but it's how you say and kind of what you talk about per se. So if you're focusing on technology under culture, you're not going to want to just tell me like all the technical details and how it works. You're going to want to more so look at the influence and impact on society. Okay. Last one's so much more straightforward. Art. Okay. Any type of medium of art, painting, cave paintings, wood block printing, excuse me, sculptures, movies, music, okay. I guess video games falls under that category. Those are all forms of arts, okay. And we're going to be looking at a lot of art in this class, and we're going to be looking at how cultures and societies use art, okay. And then the last one is architecture, okay. Architecture is the style that buildings are built in, okay. So, buildings in Montgomery, Alabama are going to be look completely different than buildings in Arizona or buildings in Mecca. Okay. So looking at kind of think that of like the style, shape, size, and how buildings are built is going to fall into the category of culture because it's going to be unique to that individual state or society. Okay. This one, the heading is State Building, Expansion, and Conflict. Really, I'm just going to refer to this one as governance. Okay. This is all your political theme, basically. Okay. So it's political structures and forms of governance. Okay. So let's start with the forms of governance. Basically, that's the different types of governments. Okay. Are they a democracy? Are they a theocracy? Are they an oligarchy? Are they autocratic? We'll learn all of these words. Okay. You're going to see this class is complex because we're going to say, hey, this society says it's like democratic, but it's really more so autocratic, or they technically fit the definition of a theocracy, but they're really not. So we're really going to be looking at some complex issues with politics. This is going to be a big theme in this class that we're going to talk about and really explore. Okay, the other one is political structures. That's just a fancy way of saying how is your government structured. Okay, in America, we have three branches of government. You have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. And the legislative branch, you have Congress, that's made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Each state gets 2 senators. The number of representatives is determined by population, right? All of those structures, quote unquote, how your government is literally formed, that it falls in the category of political structures, just like what they do, right? Legislative body makes laws, the executive branch enforces those laws. Those are all kind of political structures. Okay, so that's kind of an open-ended category of basically what is your government and how does it work? How does it function? What are the rules it has to follow? Okay, empires, nations, and nationalism. Okay. Empires is basically when a country expands its influence beyond its own borders. Normally, that is through taking land. Okay. An important word that you need to understand is imperialism. Okay. Hopefully, this was taught to you in middle school. Imperialism is how a empire is formed. Okay. And literal definition is it's a policy of extending a nation's authority by territorial acquisition or by economic and political control over other areas. Okay, so basically, an imperialism is when a country expands its influence, and that's either done economically, politically, or through military force. Okay, nations. Okay, what is a nation? When I say a nation, that term is often misused. You just think, oh, it's a country. It's not. A nation is a group of people who either have or seek political sovereignty. Okay, what does that mean? The United States is the country. The Americans, the people, are the nation. Okay, It's the nation of America because we Americans have our own political sovereignty. We have our own government. Compared to the Kurds in the Middle East, they are a nation because they seek to have their own country, but they do not. Okay, so that is definitely a word we need to know and need to be specific with when we're talking and using the terms country and nation. They have two different meanings. Okay, nationalism is this idea that your nation comes before anyone else, right? If Mr. Bennett is over here chanting USA, 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 and he thinks America's interest in our country should come before any other country, then I'm a nationalist, right? Just like if I think, it's my duty to go sign up and join the military and protect this country because it's the best country on the earth, that would be an example of nationalism. Okay. Also, under this category, you have revolts and revolutions. Okay. Revolts are when the people rise up and they go against something within their country, normally the government. Revolutions is kind of the same thing when they actually throw a revolution and attempt to change that form of government. We're going to be talking about a bunch of revolutions when we get into period 3. We'll be talking about the American, the French, the Haitian, and then other Latin American revolutions, including the Venezuelan one. Okay. Regional, trans-regional, and global structures and organizations. Okay. What would be a regional organization? That would be like NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's kind of the military alliance within that region. Trans-regional would be a organization that is over kind of 2 regions. And then global structures would be something over the whole globe, like the United Nations or the League of Nations. Okay. So that's the whole governance theme, and that's really important. Okay, we're going to be talking about that one in great depth in this class. We will be also talking about economics a great deal in this class. Okay, creation, expansion, and interaction of economic systems. Okay, economics is anything to do with trade. Okay, it's not money. If I ask you what economics is, don't say it's money because that's money's monetary, right? Economic systems are the business of trade. Okay, there will be 3 economic systems in this class: capitalism, socialism, and communism, which you see listed down here. These are economic theories that are going to be turned into actual economic systems, and we'll be talking about that in great deal in this class. Okay, first category here. Agricultural and pastoral production. So agriculture, any sort of crops that are being grown. Pastoral production are any sort of animals that are being raised to be sold. Okay. So if you grow corn, that's agriculture. If you raise sheep to be slaughtered and eaten, that would be pastoral. Okay. Please, last year, they had a really fun idea where somehow they thought agriculture fell under the culture topic. I had a question about culture. I said identify one cultural aspect of the Aztecs, and I thought they were going to tell me all about the Aztecs religion and how they were committing human sacrifices and the cycle of creation and destruction that they believed in, and instead they told me all about how they had floating gardens and they scored 0 points because that does not fall under the culture category. That falls under agricultural category here, or it falls under humans in the environment category up here. Okay, so that kind of shows there is some overlap with these. It's just as long as you make an argument on what overlap is. Many of them complained they thought it was unfair that I didn't give them points for giving their points for talking about agriculture when asked about culture. So I said, okay, come to class and make a logical argument about how agriculture equals culture, and they couldn't, so their grade did not change. Okay, so don't make that mistake. Know your themes. Okay. Trade and commerce, that's easy. Okay. What are they trading? Is it a barter system? Am I trading you 2 pencils for a pen, or am I buying that pen off of you using money? Okay. Labor systems. Okay. Workers, how are they structured, right? Is this free labor or is this coerced, right? We're going to look at various labor systems. Today we have wage labor where people are paid a wage to go work. But in the past, there was various different types of slavery that we'll be talking about and looking at this class. There's indentured servitude. Okay, so we're going to be looking at various labor structures. How are the workers organized? Do they have basic rights? Do they have any sort of protections? Are they paid a wage? Any sort of thing that has to do with workers and kind of what their daily lives are is going to kind of fall under that system and how that works, right? Industrialization is kind of hard to imagine, but that's basically when the world starts building factories and moving to cities, and we start everything that we own is factory produced and no longer hand produced, right? The Industrial Revolution will be a huge topic that we'll talk about in this class, in which the world switched from everything being made by artisans to being mass produced. We live in an industrialized society today. That's why it's hard to imagine a society that's not industrialized, because it's what we've known our entire lives. Okay. And then we talked about the economic theories, capitalism, socialism, and communism, and we'll go into great depth in those in this class. Please, 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 there is no reason why you should get these confused. Every year kids do. Okay. But you should know, in America, we are a capitalist country, not a communist country. Every year they confuse capitalism and communism, and I have no idea why. Okay. Because yes, the definitions are similar, but in no way are these economic systems similar at all whatsoever. Okay. Development and transformation of social structures is the next theme. Okay. Any sort of social question is really kind of basic. Okay. How do people live their lives? What do their relationships look like? Right. The first one is gender roles and relations. Right. In this society, what is the role of women? Okay. Are they confined to domestic duties? Are they allowed to work? The relation as well, right? Is this society misogynistic? How do they view women? How do they treat women? Do women have the right to vote? Okay. Those are all questions that will fall under a social structure. Family and kinship, right? What is the family structure? Okay. Is it the nuclear family where it's mom and dad and they have a family and they stay together forever? Or is polygamy allowed, where a man is allowed to have more than one wives and having multiple offsprings from that? Is this, the Middle East, where they're allowed a harem, where they're just allowed to have as many wives and concubines as they want? Okay. What are these relationships looking like? What are these friendships looking like? Are people from different ethnic groups allowed to be friends, or is there discrimination between those two? Okay. Racial and ethnic construction. Okay. What are the breakup of the various races and ethnicities within your society? Do they get along? Do they not get along? Things like that. You see, there's definitely going to be overlap with these, right? With governance, right? Governance is going to play a lot on social structures, especially if the government is the one enforcing these social structures. So if you look at like racial laws in the United States and in like Nazi Germany and South Africa. Okay, that's definitely social structure, but there's a little leeway. You can talk about it for this theme and this theme because it's the government that is going to be enforcing those. Okay. There's also a cultural aspect to this, right? Maybe hatred between various ethnic groups isn't because the government's enforcing it, but it's because they have a cultural belief that is tied to kind of their religion or their belief system, right? Japan believing themselves to be the master Asian race, that is something that's been perpetuated by the government, but that is kind of a belief system that existed before their government they have today existed. So that's really more of a cultural influence, right? So again, there is some overlap with these themes. So when you talk, you need to make aware, you know what you're saying, you know what theme you're talking about. Use that to your advantage, okay? Again, it doesn't necessarily matter, right? If you can make a logical argument that what you're talking about falls under this theme, then you'll get the point, okay? There's no one correct answer. So, if you write something and I'm like, well, that, it doesn't fall under that category, I'm not just going to take points off for it, just as long as you logically explain it, right? The only way that you lose points on that is if logically it makes no sense to me and you can't explain how it makes sense, okay? And the last one is social and economic class, right? There's class structures in society in America. Um, in the past, it's been based on race. You can argue today it's still based on race. Another class structure we have in America is the economic class, the rich, the middle, and the poor. Okay, so basically, how are these hierarchies in your society, these social hierarchies structured, right? Is it based on ethnicity? Is it based on race? Is it based on your career? Is it based on the amount of money you have? Okay, those are all factors that you're going to look at that are going to fall under these social structures. Okay. And then last theme, more straightforward, technology and innovation, right? What technologies have they developed and how are they going to use those technologies, okay? So this is the first thing. You got to know all this to be really successful in my class. The next thing you got to know is you really got to know this region's map, okay? If I asked about East Asia, okay, and you start writing about Vietnam, you're not going to get any points, right? If I ask about the Middle East and you start talking about West Africa, you're not going to get any points, okay? We really, really need to know this map. We will then even be looking at further breakdowns of these regions like West and Eastern Europe and stuff like that. But you'll really need to know that. Some of these regions are perceptual, so like the Middle East, there's a little more leeway where if you include North Africa in your definition of the Middle East, that would be okay. And we'll talk about that as kind of this class goes on. But for now, really, really know this map, okay? A lot of this was in your summer work, okay? Your summer work, you also had oceans and mountain ranges and other things that you should really familiarize yourself with to be successful, okay? These are the first two ways, the first two things you got to know, okay? And then after that, you now need to learn the information that we're going to start learning in order to be successful in this class, okay?